In this fifth and final part, I talk with Bryce Rogers from episode 23, who was previously a project engineer at Edge Foods. Hey, Bryce! It's so great to speak with you again.
Hey Jeffrey, you too. Thanks for having me back.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you on the show again.
It's a pleasure to be here again.
We spoke about a year and a half ago, was roughly the time you were last on the show, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, I think it was about a year and a half ago, probably in the latter half of 2023 is my guess.
So, basically, what happened since then? Give us the update.
The professionally oriented update is that basically the last time we spoke, I was at a startup called Edge Foods, and that was in the alt protein space. We use genetically engineered cells to produce growth factors to sell to lab-grown meat companies. So that's where I was at the end of 2023 when we last spoke. But unfortunately, that chapter came to a close because Edge Foods shut down. I was there till the end. That time period, like 2023, 2024, was very challenging for plant-based foods in general. There was a lot of hype earlier around 2020, 2021. And there's kind of a bubble that burst. And it was just a challenging time for funding and hype, I suppose, around plant-based eating, unfortunately. So since the end of 2023, beginning of 2024, I've been in an explorative phase. I took a journey outside of the plant-based industry. I worked at two non-all protein related startups, but they're both still in the sustainability space. There were two other sustainability startups in or near New York City where I live. One was a company that uses methane-eating bacteria to produce carbon-negative methanol fuel. And the other is a startup that is using shrimp shell waste to produce a more sustainable alternative leather. Over the last year and a half or so, I was working at those two startups, both in engineering roles. Since around the beginning of 2025, I found myself back in the alternative protein space at a startup called Simulate. Simulate is a company that makes plant-based meats. They're somewhat well known among plant-based circles because they launched Nugs, a vegan chicken nugget, a few years ago. And they had a somewhat viral, meme, bold branding strategy. So they made a few different breaded plant-based chicken products. But now I'm there leading the mechanical engineering for a whole plant-based chicken breast product.
Wow, that sounds quite interesting. So, can you tell me a little bit more about this role that you have at? It's not just Simulate anymore, it's something else. If I recall correctly, it's Ahimsa?
Yes. So the story is that Simulate is now owned by a holding company called Ahimsa. So basically, Simulate is still a startup and we're still Simulate, but instead of being venture-backed startup, we now have a holding company. And aligned with that timeline, we've shifted our focus from the Nugs line of products that was successfully launched a while ago. We're now focusing in on R&D for this whole chicken breast product. It's a pretty small team. We're located in Brooklyn, and we're just working together, grinding out some improvements for this product. And my role is lead mechanical engineer. Basically, my main responsibilities are with the physical devices and machinery that we make this product with and perform experiments with. And to give a little more detail about the product, we're pursuing a fiber-based approach. So the reason behind that is that if you consider existing vegetarian meat analogs on the market, you'll notice that a lot of them are replicating different forms of ground meat. So it's things like chicken nuggets, sausages, and hamburger patties, things like that. That's largely because whole meat muscle is fibrous, but plant proteins have a hard time emulating a fibrous texture. And ground meat products are a little easier to emulate with plant proteins, which tend to be more like globular and clumpy in nature, you could say. And so, you can think about these existing plant-based meat analogs on the market or things like texturized soy protein, things like that, or all these like extruded products. You can take a plant protein and coax it into being similar to ground meat, but it's a little harder to imitate that hierarchical fibrous structure that muscle tissue has. And so that's what the focus of our R&D effort is. we're basically coaxing these proteins, which tend to want to be a little more globular or clumped up in a state of nature, into this more hierarchical fibrous structure to convincingly replicate animal muscle tissue.
Hmm. Sounds quite interesting. Yeah, maybe can you tell me a little bit more about what your day-to-day looks like?
Fiber spinning experiments require machines that operate autonomously. And so my role is chiefly in designing and assembling and deploying these unit operations. There's a lot of process engineering that goes into it, defining exactly what it is that we want to do at a particular step in the process, and then designing and assembling some physical system, usually a little machine that can do that. And just as an example, it could be a wash step or a press out step or applying a particular coating and making a machine that can do that unit operation in a autonomous way.
Yeah, let's just shift gears here. I want to rewind a little bit. And were there any lessons that you learned through leaving the alternative protein space, trying to find jobs elsewhere, and then getting back into the alternative protein space?
Yeah, I think there's some lessons that have been specific to that journey of leaving and coming back to alternative proteins, and also all sorts of other lessons, because this has been my professional journey, but it's also just been my journey through life. So there's been various holistic lessons as well. Starting from more like object level technical lessons, I feel really grateful to have been able to engage in multiple different fields and always on small R&D teams. And so I've gotten a lot of hands-on problem solving experience on physical problems, which are just really stimulating for me. Physical problem solving is just how I enjoy spending my professional time. And so I've learned a lot about how different physical systems operate, whether it's fluid systems or a bioreactor or fiber handling system. I've gotten to really exercise my skills in first principles thinking and physical problem solving, which has been a blessing. And then another step more broad than that, I've just gotten to learn about lifestyles and especially technical lifestyles that suit me. I felt really lucky that all my jobs have been very appealing to me in various ways, but I've still been more or less electrified by particular projects than others. And that's something I really love about the plant-based protein space, which just, I love the mission. I really love the technical work that I do. I love the tinkering and the physical problem solving, but I also really support the mission. And I love feeling poised to make an impact in something that I care about. So through all four of these startups that I've been at these past few years, it's been really valuable learning opportunities for what sort of problems I like working on and what sort of roles that I enjoy, because I've gotten to enjoy a lot of diversity in the roles that I've had.
Fair enough. Where do you see yourself in the future? Do you think you'll still stay in more of engineering roles or?
I definitely see myself staying in engineering roles. I don't know if I'm just overly attached to the title because I think it's cool, or it really is the perfect role for me, but I feel at home with it. I love the problem solving that comes with it. It all feels like technical puzzles, and I'm a big puzzles and games guy. And I enjoy pushing forward, it's just making something work in a physical system, like making something and seeing that it works and that you've affected change in the physical world as a result of your thoughts and actions is extremely satisfying. Hopefully, I don't close this chapter of my life for a long time, but eventually someday when maybe I've moved or I'm in another role, I don't know exactly where the wind will take me, but I'm honestly really enjoying being in the food manufacturing space. And I have a growing interest in the consumer packaged goods space. So I could definitely see myself sticking around in this industry, especially the plant-based portion of it, because I've really, and I'm not just saying this, I've really found myself, it's hard to imagine myself more electrified by another role than my current one. It really just feels like a great fit for me. And I hope to stick around in it for a long time. And then maybe when the chapter does eventually close for one reason or another, hopefully find myself in something similar.
Right. Yeah, I get that. Once you find that perfect fit, you almost never want to leave.
Exactly.
All right, one last question. Since you've been through, I guess, 3 jobs in the last year and a half or so. You've been through the job hunt many times and quite recently. So, do you have any advice for listeners on how to get a job in the industry?
Yes, I actually do. I don't know if I should reveal my secret sauce, but I did a few things. One was reach out to people via email, however you can get a hold of emails, because people tend to check their work emails. People don't really tend to check many other platforms, such as LinkedIn. Another thing is making a portfolio. I guess that's kind of common knowledge. And then the third thing, if this sounds appealing to you, but it worked really well for me, was in interviews. I came prepared with slides of my most relevant projects. That might be more or less relevant depending on your exact field or background. Because for mechanical engineering, it can be very visual. It's nice to provide visuals of physical things that I've built, and that makes for a much more engaging interview discussion. So that's something that worked really well for me. It indicated a lot of preparation and interest, I would say.
Yeah, that's an excellent piece of advice. I believe it's called the briefcase technique.
Is it really? There's a name for it. I thought it was just my technique.
No, it's established technique. You basically bring something, whether it's slides or whatever your portfolio that you've been working on, and showcase that to the interviewer.
Yeah, I didn't realize I was toting a briefcase, but I recommend it.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing your secret sauce. I'm sure listeners will be very eager to try that out. Thank you again so much, Bryce, for coming on the show. As always, it was so wonderful to speak with you.
Likewise, thank you so much for having me back. It was great giving updates, and I'm touched that you want to hear from me once, and even more touched that you want to hear from me twice.
We always have interesting things to share.
Thank you.
As you can see, the common theme among each of these stories is that a career in the alternative protein sector can take you in many different directions and can allow you to grow within it to find your fit. This is just one of the many reasons why there is a place for everyone, including you, to be a part of the alternative protein revolution. Thank you to all my listeners for expressing your interest in this podcast and motivating me to continue. Thank you to all the guests who came on the podcast for taking the time to share their experiences and providing advice on how you can get into the alternative protein industry. Lastly, I'd like to give a big thank you to Talist for supporting and promoting this podcast, as well as being such a tremendous resource for people looking for careers in the alternative protein industry. If you have any questions about the show and or would like to chat with me, my email is in the show notes.